Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first webinar in the series on the church and teen parenting. My name is Richard Lundy. I'm the team leader of Sikunye, and I will be hosting this webinar series. If this is the first time you are at a Sikunye event, let me do an introduction. Sikunye is an initiative of Common Good, which is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2006 that aims at seeing people flourishing in three key periods in their life: in the first 1,000 days or early life, whilst they're receiving primary or secondary education, and thirdly, when they are seeking employment. We are all about supporting grassroots transformation. Now that I've introduced myself, please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself. Include your name, perhaps where you're joining from, and the organization or the church that you're representing tonight. We'd love those connections to take place. Now, Sikunye connects two things together. We connect the first 1,000 days of life and the local church. And let me explain a little bit more about that. The first 1,000 days describes the period of a child's life from conception to the age of 2. This is an extremely important time where a child's brain is developing faster than at any other time in their life. In fact, the brain grows to 80% of its adult size by the age of 2. And the brain is particularly sensitive to experiences and environments at this time. And so it's a time of great opportunity and risk. It's a time of opportunity because if the young child consistently gets enough of the right kind of care during this period from conception to 2, the brain forms strong foundations that allows them to learn well and flourish in childhood and even into adulthood. It's also a time of great risk because if the care the child receives is insufficient or inconsistent, their brain does not get that good, strong foundation, and they are put in a pathway of survival, facing additional challenges over their life course. And so the first 1,000 days is a crucial time. And it is the parents and the caregivers to these young lives that need to provide this consistent nurturing care, right? What the child needs comes from the parents. And so, if we want to see a brighter future for our nation, we all need to focus on investing in the first 1,000 days. Now, Sikunye's specific focus is on equipping local church communities to provide support to these parents and caregivers. We know that parenting is hard. But when parents are in a loving and caring and supportive community, they are better able to provide what baby needs to reach his or her full potential. And we believe that local churches and faith communities are well positioned and already equipped to do this. They have existing strengths and assets that can play a unique role in investing in young lives. And so this is why, as Sikunye, we are talking about this big topic. Because the teenager who is pregnant or is a child under 2, this child is in the crucial period of the first 1,000 days, that time of risk and opportunity. If the child born to a teenager receives enough of the right kind of care and support in this time, he or she is far more likely to grow up healthy and succeed in life. But we will hear later tonight how many additional challenges the teen mother faces. And mother is a child herself, remember. And this places both her and her young child at risk. And so the question is, what can the local church do to provide the support and the care that the teen parent needs? We believe the local church has a powerful role in ministering to and loving teen parents in a way that is good for baby, good for mom, and good for the local church. We know this is not simple, and there isn't one single answer, but we trust this series informs you and inspires you. We hope that it helps us all think in ways that bring new life and fresh creativity to how we respond to this big issue. I know that you are all attending today with different backgrounds, different expectations. You see that within the chat box. We have over 100 people in this Zoom webinar already. You might be here from a nonprofit, a government department, academic institution, NGO, a local church or faith community. And again, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box so other people can get to meet you. But we recognize that because we are coming from different perspectives, you might hear things in this webinar series that you 100% agree with. You might hear things that you have difficulty with, things that you strongly disagree with, or things that you need to explore further. You might be encouraged by some things or challenged by others. And I trust that we can learn tonight learn with each other and from each other, and to say to every one of you that you are all welcome in this space. For South Africa to have a brighter future, we need a whole of society approach. And Sikunye's goal in that is to see churches play their unique role in children reaching their full potential. Now, to help us cover this big topic of teenage pregnancy, we have invited a range of speakers to help us understand the various factors so that our response is informed and backed by good research and good practice. In fact, we ran this series in 2022, and we've had multiple requests to run the series again. And so we are using recordings from our previous events. There are 11 different speakers across the 3 sessions. Some of these speakers are from academia, others from a health background, NGO workers, church leaders, and theologians. Now, knowing how many things there are to address, we have 3 sessions. So welcome to session 1. Tonight, we are unpacking the issues of teen pregnancy. Next week, on Wednesday, we're looking at the very practical ways that churches can support and care for families. And the third week, on the 4th of December, is understanding the teenage father, as well as going deeper into how to care for young families. I can appreciate and understand that you might get to the end of tonight and think, why didn't they address this particular question that I have? And I invite you to join us for all 3 sessions, to join the whole conversation, because we would likely address those issues in the next 2 webinars. As I mentioned, tonight's session is focusing on the issues of teen pregnancy. We will be exploring the statistics of teen pregnancy in South Africa, unpacking why teenage pregnancy is an issue for the mom and the baby, as well as why it is an issue for the local church and the church leader. And I trust that by the end of tonight, you'll be able to answer the question of why can churches care for teen parents? And next week, we'll be looking a little bit about how you can do that. Now, first on tonight's agenda is exploring the state of teenage pregnancy in South Africa. What are the statistics telling us? We often read big headlines that grab our attention, talking about the rate going up or how the stats changed during lockdown. You might remember that. But what are the numbers really, and what stories are these statistics telling us about the state of teen pregnancy in South Africa? Now, to help us answer that, we invited Nicolette Henny to unpack the numbers for us. She's currently serving as the Deputy Director for Health Support in the Early Life Course Unit in the Western Cape Department of Health. Her portfolio includes women's health, adolescent and youth health, nutrition, and HIV prevention, amongst other focus areas. Her career in public service has spanned 20 years, and her interest lies within early life, in particular, first 1,000 days, breastfeeding, and early childhood development in the public health arena. So let's lean in to hear from Nicolette Henny on the statistics of teenage pregnancy.
So thank you for the introduction. So I'm just going to start because I have very limited time. So first of all, I just want to thank the contributors to this presentation. The thoughts are sparked by the request, but we have people and behind the scenes work that go on, and also to thank Sikunye for creating the opportunity to share this information. So I'd like to start with a quote. A new baby is like the beginning of all things, wonder, hope, and a dream of possibility. And for many of us, this is true. For others, we experience it from the other angle. So just to define what we mean when we talk about teenage pregnancy, we refer to an individual that is under the age of 20 years old that has become pregnant. And in the department, we track the number of girls falling pregnant in 2 categories, namely 10 to 14 years old and 15 to 19 years old. The vulnerable group being the 10 to 14-year-old girl. So just to touch lightly on the first 1,000 days that Richard has referred to, that the high-risk client is the younger girl who essentially is still developing and has an underdeveloped reproductive system. In the department and even worldwide, there's a focus on the first 1,000 days, which is the period of conception to the second year of life. This is a critical and sensitive period for development, particularly for the brain. There's many connections that's happening in this period. Therefore, if the mother is already under pressure, the development of the baby is under pressure in this period. And thus a teenage pregnancy places mother at a very high risk. The risk is not only to the mother, but it's also to the developing baby. Besides the physiological risk, there's also mental health risk. And the risks include, which will be elaborated by other presenters, it includes premature birth, a risk of death, health conditions, and implications for the future life of this developing fetus. So when we look a little bit closer at data, and starting with global data, teenage pregnancy is a global phenomenon. It's not particular to South Africa or the Western Cape. It's occurring across the world. And WHO reported in 2019 that approximately 21 million young girls were pregnant, 55% of them ending in abortions. And we know that the risk of an abortion in a low to middle income country is quite high. The risk of going to an unaccredited site, to a backyard abortion center, is very high. So concerted efforts to stem the teenage pregnancy globally, nationally, and provincially is currently underway. So there are many reasons why she falls pregnant, falling into the different categories of socioeconomic, physical environment, behavior, and healthcare. But the biggest risk is around the socioeconomic environment that she's living in and the health behavior of the individual. And when we talk about health behavior, we talk about smoking, diet, exercise, alcohol, and sexual activity of this young girl. The social determinants has a major impact on the health outcomes of this young girl, especially if she's already a vulnerable individual. In South Africa, 30% of all teenage girls fall pregnant, and 1 in every 3 pregnancies, though that girl will not return to school. And I mean, you can then go on to list the reasons, the outcomes of her not returning to school. She will be limited in the ability to care for the baby, but also for herself. And so the statistics paint an alarming picture for South African teenagers, even when we look at the HIV infection rate of these young girls. In the Western Cape, a bit closer to home, even though contribution is below 15% of total deliveries in the Western Cape, the target, which is 10%, there are still pockets of concern. There are still areas within the Western Cape where the delivery rate of 10 to 14-year-olds is on the rise. These girls do not seek care naturally or early, often hiding their pregnancy from parents or caregivers and leaving them vulnerable to complications. And the impact of the decision not to seek care is not only on the pregnancy, but also on the health system to accept her and care for her further. Some girls don't even seek care after they have delivered that baby. Looking further at the provincial picture, the graph on the left, which is the teenage deliveries in facility, even though there's a drop, we are picking up all the deliveries. So some girls do not enter the system, so we don't know about the girl that hasn't entered the system, and she is not counted in the number of girls. Some may not be present at health facilities even after birthing. Further to the provincial picture, and if you look at this graph, it appears to be stable. So this graph shows us what the delivery in facility for teenagers were over the financial year, the previous financial year. And if you look at the colored graphs, they appear very stable. The number of teenagers has decreased, but the rate of delivery has stayed the same, which then tells us that more girls are becoming pregnant. So thank you for the opportunity. I want to echo some caution of how we treat these girls and teenagers who become parents. either by their own action or by the action of others. Just because you are free to say whatever you want, don't always mean you should. So how we treat them impacts them and impacts their future decisions. Think before you act, think twice before you speak. Words cannot be taken back, and words are often the reason why girls make decisions that is not always in their best interest. Thank you very much.
Wow. When I read those statistics, what makes it hard to grapple with is that there's numbers on a slide, but these numbers represent people and their stories, represent households, represent communities, all filled with hope and dreams and potential. Nicolette Henny, being based in the Western Cape, shared mostly focusing on the Western Cape data, and you might be interested in more national numbers. And here is a slide from Bekisisa data highlighting the variation between provinces. And this is coming from the 2023 year. One of the big messages that accompanied this map is the link between poverty levels and teenage pregnancies. They were pointing out how the provinces with the higher levels of poverty have higher levels of teenage pregnancy, with quite a big difference between, for example, Gauteng and the Eastern Cape. Now, these statistics open our eyes to how big the issue is. Nicolette Henny mentioned that 30% of teenage girls fall pregnant. And some of the factors that make statistics around this issue a little bit more complex than perhaps some other data is that not all pregnancies are reported. She also shared that over half of these pregnancies of teenagers are terminated. And some years the numbers of teen pregnancies go up, other years they go down. But what Becca Sisa points out here is that 1 in 7 births in South Africa are children being born to teenage mothers. You walk through a hospital ward, 1 in 7 beds, or maternity ward, 1 in 7 beds will have a teenager in there. You're thinking about round numbers in the South African story. In 2023, the number was put at 122,000 children were born to teenagers in South Africa in the 2023 financial year. Now, if you're like me, you might be thinking, we want to reduce the number of teenagers falling pregnant. And you are right. Prevention work is crucial. So much more can be done and so much more should be done to reduce the number of teenagers falling pregnant. But this webinar series, all three of them, is grappling with the hard reality that despite prevention work, there are still teenagers who are parents. If we halve the number of children born to teenagers, we would still have 60,000 teenagers, 60,000 children giving birth to children each year. And we want to ask that question, what do they need to do well and for their young child to do well? And so our message as Sikunye is prevention work is necessary and care for teen parents is necessary. We don't feel like we have to choose between them, the two of them. You can care for teen parents and work to see that fewer teenagers fall pregnant. And we believe that the local church is well positioned and equipped to play a good and positive role in teenagers' lives on both sides of prevention and care. And there are many resources, programs, and messages and ways to engage with teenagers and journey through with them through this important stage of their life, focusing on prevention work. But this series is focusing on the care for those teenagers who have fallen pregnant and who are parents. Now, we recognize this is a complex topic with many different views, and often these views are very strong. And these views influence our attitudes, our responses, and our behaviors. But why is this topic so complex? One reason this topic is complex is because we have our own stories. Those numbers we heard earlier are not numbers alone, they are people, and they might include us. You might be attending tonight having been a teen mother or a teen father. Perhaps you weren't a teen, but perhaps you impregnated a teenager. Your child might be a teen parent. Maybe you are a parent of a teenager and you're really concerned that they are going to fall pregnant. Maybe our neighbors, our friends, our families have a story of teenage pregnancy. When we were running an event in Gauteng recently, this topic came up, and a church leader asked a challenging question to the other church leaders in the room. And he asked, how many of us in this room were born to parents who loved each other, were married, and were planning to have a child? You see, this topic stirs up big emotions because it touches us all. And because it touches us all, we are going to approach this topic having been shaped and influenced by our own stories and our own experiences. And another reason this is complex is because we have our own church stories. We may love our local church. Perhaps we've been hurt or disappointed by it. Perhaps you have no church affiliation or no experience of a church, and you're struggling to see the connection of what the church can do. And then when we bring in this topic of teenage pregnancy, perhaps all of us have experienced or witnessed church leaders saying things or doing things that were maybe good, maybe bad, or perhaps a bit of both. Our church story will shape the way we engage this topic of teenage pregnancy and the church. Another reason for this being complex for church leaders is because of their role in being spiritual leaders. For many church leaders, the issue is that it is unwed, not just teen pregnancy, but unwed pregnancy, and recognizing in their understanding of scripture that that's not in line with God's design. This is an additional challenge for church leaders to engage this topic. There's also a tension when we talk about this, that the local church has strengths and assets that can be used to care very well for teen parents. At the same time, there are entrenched practices. There might be church policies, there might be community beliefs, cultural practices that are at work that might be making it easier for a church leader to care for teen parents, or perhaps making it very difficult. Church leaders have shared with us the pressure they feel from congregants to be very firm with teen parents, and the adults in the church often telling the pastor to send the girl out to church. And this is held in tension with biblical texts of how Jesus showed grace to women in similar situations, like the woman at the well in John chapter 4, or the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. We must also recognize that this is complex because every pregnancy story is unique. You're going to hear that a few times tonight. Maybe the teenager wanted the baby. Maybe there was a crime involved. Maybe granny and grandpa are very supportive. Maybe the dad wants to be active, or maybe mom is alone and isolated. Maybe the man who impregnated the girl is a prominent community member, and the girl feels that she cannot tell anyone who it is. And you can understand and appreciate that the situation that leads to a 12-year-old being pregnant compared to a 19-year-old different, a 19-year-old, it's a very different situation. We cannot assume that all teen pregnancies and the stories behind them are the same. And so, because every pregnancy story is unique, every response is unique. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. What we do know is that in every teen pregnancy story is a child who is having a child. She needs more support to do well, not less support. Our hope for this series is that even though this is complex, that we all have an increased concern for teen parents and take steps to care for them. We hope that you start conversations with others in your church, in your organization and community to look for ways of caring for that family that is good for the baby, good for mom, good for dad, and good for your church or organization. And so for the sake of the baby, for the sake of the mom and dad, this is something that we want to address. Now, the next topic we are exploring is the issue of teen pregnancy for the mom and for the baby. Why is this an issue for the teenager? And why is it an issue for the baby? What is unique about teenage pregnancy in particular and parenting? What are the challenges that this brings to a teenager and their child? Now, Dr. Renee Nasson is going to be sharing with us. She is a fellow of the South African College of Psychiatrists and a registered child and adolescent psychiatrist. She is the clinical head of the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service at Lentegeur Hospital and was recently appointed as the provincial coordinator. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of Psychiatry at Stellenbosch University. She's registered for a doctoral degree in the field of pediatric HIV neuropsychiatry. Other interests are public mental health and the support of the arts therapy within child and adolescent mental health. Dr. Nasson is going to help us understand the issues of teen pregnancy for mom and for the baby.
All right, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and the kind introduction. I'm going to be providing some contextual background, and then we're going to be speaking about the impacts that Richard mentioned. Some of it has already been touched on by Nicolette. And then just a few recommendations from a health service perspective, because next week, Dr. Estelle Lawrence is going to cover that in more detail. You will see on the bottom right a picture from a Time magazine, actually in 1985. And so, of course, we know that teen pregnancies have been with us for a long time. But just today, I spoke to a friend of mine who lives in the UK, and I told her about the presentation tonight. And she was saying to me that teen pregnancy has plummeted in the UK. And of course, I was very curious to know why. And she said, well, you know, in the 70s and 80s, somehow it was more socially acceptable for there to be teen mums. But the research showed that the impact of social media has actually deterred young people from falling pregnant, because it's no longer cool to appear on social media as a mum. So that's very interesting, a positive impact of social media. So just a few key facts to consider, and that is most girls don't plan to be pregnant, and many of them, and particularly in our setting, unfortunately, become pregnant as a result of forced and unprotected sex. So there is a link with gender-based violence in our setting, and we need to then frame this as being a phenomenon rooted in powerlessness. And of course, you've already been introduced to the significant impact on these young people's health, on education, and then there are socio-emotional impacts as well. And this impacts both on the mother and also on the life of the infant. But for the family and the individual who is pregnant, there are so many thwarted expectations, and very often it's absolutely devastating because there is a powerful feeling of loss. But it would be remiss of me not to mention that for every negative story, there's also the one of resilience and survival of young teens. And I wouldn't say the younger group, but the older teen, maybe the 18, 19-year-olds who do survive and who do actually manage to make something of their lives. So what are the causes of pregnancy? I've already alluded to some, and of course there is no one single cause. The immediate impulse is to look at the individual factors. Nicolette shared a list of them. And so, yes, it is true that teens are curious, they take risks, there's peer pressure, and some of them don't have information. And yes, of course, social media, and I just mentioned it in a positive sense, but unfortunately, teens and young people are exposed to a lot on the internet. But then there's also the phenomenon of adverse childhood experiences, and unfortunately, it's particularly pertinent in our setting. So what are adverse childhood experiences? These are traumatic events that have negative, lasting effects on health and well-being. And if you look at this phenomenon, it consists of abuse, neglect, household challenges, which leads to traumatic experiences. The quote in the middle is referring to the United States from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it says that adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And the same can certainly be said in South Africa. So what are the impacts? The impacts are actually quite devastating, and they can start from the moment of the adversity, and it can end at the end of life. And these impacts are widespread, impacts socially, impacts on health, mental health, and on the socioeconomic circumstances. But unfortunately leads to high rates of trauma-related conditions and other mental disorders. when it occurs in the caregiving environment, it has the most profound impacts that are lifelong. So if one looks at teen pregnancies, and in some cases, linking this with gender-based violence, with sexual abuse, and then, of course, the poor socioeconomic circumstances, this phenomenon poses serious questions to our society in general, and especially in terms of health service provision, education, in terms of life skills and retaining kids in school, and then, of course, all the social services that many need, but few actually often obtain. So let's come to South Africa, because as we call it ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience, it's not unique to South Africa, but this is the backdrop of South Africa, and I won't list them, you are well familiar with them. But then came COVID, and COVID exacerbated everything. And unfortunately, in the wake of COVID, there were disruptions in health and education, and unfortunately, a rise in gender-based violence and a rise in pregnancy. I was looking at those figures that Nicolette shared with us, and you see what happened, and then it's kind of trailing down again now that we're in 2022. And so unfortunately, we've got this phenomenon that we are slowly recovering from, and from which many of us are still traumatized. And what then about the most adverse people in our country? Just a very quick introduction to this concept of complex trauma. It's the cumulative and continuous type of trauma, which often happens in the caregiving environment. And again, in terms of its impact, this kind of trauma, or any kind of trauma, will affect young people, and immediately they would show some or other disturbance in mood, in their levels of arousal and their behavior. But then we also know from research that trauma can have a lifelong impact on a child in terms of adaptive functioning, interpersonal functioning, how they regulate their emotions, in terms of their cognitive development. And then, of course, it's shown, and we've got a brilliant research that actually shows how trauma and adverse experiences impact immune function and endocrine, or how the hormones function, and those kinds of things. And that is what triggers disease, physical disease. But again, when it comes to behavior, seeing that we're talking about pregnancy, it may also increase risk behaviors, early sexual debut being one of them. I thought I should introduce you to this concept of disability adjusted life years. We call them DALYs. So what is this, and what am I showing you here? It is a public health measure of disease burden, and it's expressed as number of years lost to ill health, disability, or death. It was developed in the early 1990s as a way of comparing life expectancy, death, and death in different countries. Now, again, you're going to see highlighted in red the continent of Africa, and to the right, you will see in the global south, the darkly colored areas is where we need to focus, and which tells a rather unfortunate and sad story. But back to the graph, which is divided between the two age groups, the top one being the younger age, you will see there, and I think this is pertinent as a backdrop to understanding a young mother and their health when they become pregnant. The top condition is iron deficiency anemia. And that there is a link between anemia and nutrition, right? But you see already emerging the emotional disorders like anxiety disorders. But then look down to the 15 to 19-year-olds, still nutritional issues. We know that because of the issues related to poverty here. But look there, maternal conditions, depressive disorders, and self-harm. And for another time, the phenomenon of suicide is gripping us as well as a public health problem. What about death? What do teenagers die of? And again, I won't have the time to go through all of the countries, but at the top is the African continent, and you will see more teenagers die in Africa. And what do they die of? The road injuries, HIV, but there you go, maternal causes and meningitis. And you will see lower down, you don't see the pink, the light pink ones, dark pink also. And that would be interesting to debate about what are the differences, but the differences are pretty obvious. So let's get on to talking now about the impact of teen pregnancy on the young mother. I think it's important to say, and especially in the older teen group, most pregnancies are uncomplicated, and that we need to look through the lens of risk versus resilience. There are lots of risks, but equally young people, humans, all of us are incredibly resilient. And so let's look at the health and education impacts. And again, and I will repeat, because I think we need to remember this, is that the impact is lifelong. We are dealing with an interrupted childhood and an interrupted adolescence, which impacts on adulthood right to the end of life. So the pregnancy-related issues were already mentioned. These are obstetric complications. There are problems right from the start, even during the pregnancy, because they may not go in book for the pregnancy at the antenatal clinic. We see more emergencies and adverse outcomes, including a higher death rate, particularly in the 10 to 14-year-old group. And then, of course, the general health impacts are many. But to name a few, they are nutritional because of anemia. There may be infections related to sexually transmitted diseases, and of course the gynecological ones that can be significant, especially in the young age group. And then of course, the impact of the adverse life events plus a pregnancy can have long-term and intergenerational health impacts, with a young person dropping out of school with poor employment prospects, and then of course the cycle of poverty ensues. What about education? We've already mentioned most of them drop out of school, few of them return, so we have a interrupted education, and as I said, long-term, there are these negative impacts. So from a policy point of view, what have we got? We've got incredible policies in our country. This is the national policy, and just to share with you some of the policy provisions related to retaining a teenager in school. And the key points are that schools are meant to provide enabling and supportive environments to pregnant moms, to uphold the learners' rights to education. They have an obligation to report pregnancies, and this vital responsibility to at all costs retain them. Just looking at the mental health impact, the most important thing here is what we heard before, what Nicolette was saying about the first 1,000 days. The big, most important thing here is about the attachment, the bonding at birth, because this sets a secure pattern for life. What are the emotional needs then at a time of great distress, fear, and uncertainty for the teen during the pregnancy at all costs, if there can be a nurturing approach rather than a judgmental one, to at least provide the teen with someone to confide with who could be supportive, but not to forget that the families are suffering and distressed, and for them to be supported to provide a safe space for their teen, so that they can also be supported to make shared pregnancy decisions. And then, of course, this is a very uncomfortable question to us as society. How do we move from a punitive to a supportive approach? And then, of course, after the pregnancy, a teen needs support to cope with the demands of parenting while still a child, herself, and then need support to stay on their own developmental path. Bear in mind that, as I said, we recognize resilience, but on the extreme end of this, when things go really, really wrong, there are risks, mental health risks such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and unfortunately self-harming, and some teens do attempt and commit suicide as a result of this. Then what is the impact on the infant? And again, it can have a lifespan impact. And quickly then, because we're coming to the end, at the time of birth, the research is showing that there are increased rates of low birth weight, of premature birth, trauma to the baby as a result of birth complications, and unfortunately increased risk of death in the infant. And then to the medium and long term, the infant and child's future is tied up with the mother's health and mental health. And this determines the baby's well-being. So you might have a mother who herself has unfortunately had a birth complication and is not physically well, but on top of it is grappling with all kinds of feelings of guilt and of resentment at having to be a parent, and ambivalent feelings towards the baby. This unfortunately impacts on the baby in terms of, and it manifests through feeding problems, failure to thrive, and the baby's capacity to regulate him or herself. And later on, this can manifest with adverse or negative behaviors. And then again, undernutrition in the mom is going to impact on the brain development of the baby. Stress and depression in the mom is going to impact on the attachment relationship. And this is going to set a path either for the negative or for the positive outcome. And then we mentioned exposure to substances. An HIV-infected baby, it can have devastating effects health-wise and on the brain. And then, of course, poor socioeconomic circumstances impacts the child's health and cognitive development. So in conclusion, the effects of teen pregnancy is widespread and long-lasting and impacts as a result of these multiple problems. For the teen mother, it's a childhood interrupted. I haven't focused on the teen father in any detail, but I think it's important just to mention when it is a teen, which is not always the case, there is tremendous emotional distress around having to become a parent, but a lot of distress also in the family, and of course the financial impacts are felt. There is a disruption of the natural parental unit in adults, which is a mother, a father, and a baby, or two parents and a baby. And often this is compensated for by grandparents, but this is a difficult issue for people to grapple with. But the reality is, if one deprives the presence of the father in the child's life, at any rate, 5 or 10 years later, these couples get together and then the attachment relationship has been damaged. And it's very difficult to reverse later on. So in terms of reflections and recommendations from a health perspective, of course, what we want to do is to prevent this pregnancy. And that's going to be a discussion for another time. But from a health perspective, to encourage and support the young person into antenatal and postnatal care, for there to be a discussion or access to contraception, to attend the baby clinics, to ensure that there is emotional support for the teen and families, and vital, the support of the mothering and the parenting. For there to be support of the young father and to access whatever health services there might be, whether it be community health workers or home visitors, and of course, retention in education and access to social grants and so forth, and where needed, early access to mental health services, and not to leave it for too late before the teen then starts to self-harm. On that then, I say thank you, and just to say this is an opportunity to pause and reflect on the role of care providers, parents, schools, faith-based organizations to address stigma, the role of people like ourselves in the health sector, in education and social services. So may we aspire to do the best for the best outcome for these children, for society as a whole. Before I end, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues who have happily contributed and engaged with me in preparing these slides, Dr. Almarie Malik, Dr. Estelle Lawrence, Dr. Teresa Whittaker, and Dr. Anusha Lachman. Thank you very much.
Wow, and Dr. Nassan has given us such a deep dive into the issues that the mother and the child face. There's a lot going on there. And by the way, after this event, we will send you a recording of tonight's webinar. You can go back and rewatch and forward it on to anyone that you feel may want to know more. Also, in particular, I'll send you a link to these slides that Dr. Nassan shared because you may want to go in and view it on a bigger device, especially the statistics and the graphs that may have been too small if you're on a mobile device. And again, just to note that it is wonderful to see such a wide variety of people in the room tonight. I wish I could greet you all by name. I want to thank you for being here and for prioritizing on a Wednesday night, seeing young children being cared for. Now, through Dr. Nasser's presentation, we can see that there is so much going on in a teenager's life. There are contributing factors that increase teen pregnancies. There are big risks during teen pregnancy to mother and child. And then there are additional risks and challenges even across the life course. Big things going on. And when we hear news of a teenager falling pregnant, we as adults are faced with some big emotions, often depending on the type of relationship that we have with the teenager. We might be shocked, disappointed, frustrated, angry, betrayed, shamed, stressed, and so on and so on. And in that state, we might try to bring closure to these big emotions by labeling the teenager, saying she's just this or he's just that. And it is so easy to label a teen mother or father. But then through this presentation, we must recognize we need to slow down and see how much might be going on in that child's, teenager's household and life. Because when we slow down, we realize how the way we treat that teenager will have a powerful impact on them in the short term, but also the long term. Let me just share one example. One thing that we see when we think about the risks that mom faces, her access of other services and healthcare. Dr. Nasser mentioned ensuring a teenager gets antenatal and postnatal checkups, for example. And so some of the additional risks that a teenage mom faces can be reduced by accessing health services at the right time. But if teen mom is not supported and cared for, she might not reach out for help. She might keep it a secret. She might not get important information from the clinic and so on. If she's feeling shamed and shunned or rejected or isolated, she may end up making unhealthy choices for herself and her baby. Our care for her influences her access of important services. Other research has shown that pregnant teenagers are often fearful to ask questions of adults because they fear being judged, they delay going to the clinic, and they typically turn to their peers for guidance. And unfortunately, other teenagers are not a reliable source of health information for a pregnant teenager. And so I'll say it again, our care for a teen parent has a big impact on her health and well-being, as well as that of her young child. Now, in this topic of teen pregnancy and parenting, we also want to bring the voice of the teenager into the room. But given how vulnerable these teenagers are, we didn't want to put a camera on them and exploit them in their story. So to hear their voices, we had a few questions for teenagers. Questions like, what is it like being a teen parent? What support do you appreciate? How did your church respond? Those kinds of questions. And so we recorded voice notes from teen mothers and fathers, and we'll be playing them over the course of the 3 webinars. Now, we recognize that every pregnancy story is unique, and these stories represent these teenagers, not every teenager. But we can learn from them and their experiences and not assume that we know them fully because they meet a certain number of facts. So let's listen into one of these stories about a teen parent.
The ups and downs of being a pregnant teen was like sometimes hard, sometimes good, and it was sometimes okay, but then I felt sometimes that I wasn't going to be a good mom to my baby, but then I would always pray and ask God to calm me down and give me strength, because He wouldn't have planted the baby in me, and that without a reason. And even though I felt down and things, and sometimes emotional, sad, and that you would always cheer me up, and everyone that was around there always teach me a lot of things, and I would take it in, and I would just come sit at home and think about it and what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Sometimes things look hard, but when there's people that support you, and then things can get a little easier.
What I appreciate about this teenager sharing her story is how she shares that some things are good, some things are hard, some things are bad, and recognizing the need for community and support in the season that she's going through. And what we have looked at so far, the stats of teen pregnancy and recognizing that every pregnancy story is unique. We've also seen that teen parents face unique challenges and stresses, which has the potential to create an environment where the baby does not consistently get enough of what they need, and they're being put on a pathway of survival with an impact across their life course. In my conversations with church leaders on this topic, there are many strong emotions, and there are many factors at play that make this complex, as we mentioned earlier. When we talk about teen pregnancy, what are the issues that the church leader is facing? So let's look into the church, and our next speaker is going to help paint that picture for us. Dr. Viola Fransman studied her master's in theology with youth and children's ministry as her focus area. She went on to study a PhD at Northwest University, focusing on mentoring children between the ages of 6 and 12. She explored whether the actions of the Christian faith community did achieve mentoring in the lives of these young children. She is a volunteer researcher and training facilitator at the Petra Institute for Children's Ministry. Her interests include fatherless boys and helping children and youth reach their potential holistically. Now, to start this topic off, exploring the issues that church leaders face, Dr. Fransman asked a friend of hers, who is a church leader, to share her story. And that will kick us off, and then Dr. Fransman will take it on from there. So let's explore, how is this an issue for church leaders?
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Annalyn Fortuin, but everyone is calling me Mammy. So I'm staying in Orchard, very small place here in the Durans. I'm married, have 2 kids, boy and a girl. The girl is 20 years old, and the boy is turning 9. I'm staying in this small place in the Durans in Orchard. I'm also a leader and a pastor and a leader that is really active. When I'm speaking about active, I like together with the young boys and girls in my community. And I usually involve me in those who are in gangsterism. So I like to speak to them and to be with them. To tell you a little story about myself, it all started at 2020 when the girl of mine was at a matric, doing a matric year, and I think it was almost in the middle of the year that we found out that she was pregnant. And we started to see that her body has been like changing, and we saw that, me and my husband, and we we didn't ask her, but we thought that she's gonna come to us and to maybe speak to us, because we are a family that gather every night, and we do every night devotions, and we like to surround and speak to each other. We have a good relationship, me and my husband and kids. So at this stage of her being pregnant, I think it was almost 4 months, the house became very tense, and no one was speaking to anyone. So at that time, we just gathered for the devotions, but we didn't have that. We're not that speaking terms, because everyone wanted to ask who's going to speak first about this pregnancy. And I asked my husband, are we going to continue to not to speak to her? Because I know what is happening, especially when you are pregnant, because of the baby that is in the womb, that is hearing everything that we speak and feeling. So I thought that we have to do something. We didn't want the baby to feel that we didn't want the baby, but it was very difficult for us at that stage. So I think we planned to have a meeting at a difficult time, and we spoke, me and my husband, how we're going to hold the meeting. And we took one night, I think it was on a Wednesday, that we said, this is going to be the day that we're going to have the meeting. And we called the meeting that we're going to speak your heart. So we sat together and we said we're going to have a meeting, and this meeting is going to work like this. When someone is speaking, you are not going to be interrupted. Everyone will wait until you speak. And then when you're done speaking, then the other one will have a chance to speak. So we just tell each other how the meeting will be looking like. So we sat as the family, and we held this meeting. And we opened scripture, and we discussed around the scripture, and we focus on the scripture where we were speaking about the lost son. So we focus on what he did when he returns, that he asked for forgiveness for his father, and that he have sinned in front of his father's eyes and in front of God's eyes. So we didn't stretch it long. We just spoke about it. And afterwards, we opened the meeting then with prayer. And then we asked who wanted to speak first. And then my husband said he wanted to speak first. And at that time, my husband was very angry. And he said to her, I was so disappointed. I'm so disappointed in you. I was just thinking about the values that we taught you, and everything that we were even dreaming with you. We didn't even take your dream. We dreamed with you, because we wanted you to do what you wanted to do. But he was very angry that night. And he spoke, and then she was just crying the whole time when her father was speaking. And after him, I asked her, is there anyone who wants to speak? And then my younger boy, he said, he wanted to say something. He said, everything that my father has said, my heart is feeling the same. But I cannot wait for the baby to come because I'm going to be an uncle. We didn't even laugh for that, because that wasn't, I'm laughing now, but at that stage, no one did laugh for that, but what he have said. And after he has spoken, and then she started to cry, and she said, I cannot even look at myself. She said she was so disappointed in herself. And she doesn't even want to know how we feel about her. And she said she don't even know how the community will look at her. And she doesn't want to look at the community even. So, yeah, and I think there was a lot of guilt and all that joins with guilt and hopeless. Yeah. And I spoke to her last, and I told her what was in my heart. But what I loved, after everyone spoke, have told her what they wanted to do, to tell her, we just stand up as a whole family, the four of us, and we told her that we love her. We love her before she was pregnant, and we love you. Now you being pregnant, and we're just going to love you forever. So that was what happened at that time. Afterwards, we enjoyed the devotions, and the devotions was, yeah, we started to laugh again and, yeah, speak again. But it took every day. Doesn't like, the first day, yeah, it didn't bloom the first day. We took every day and every step every day. But we knew that we loved her every day. And that was an amazing time when we felt that it was a relief after the meeting. I think a month later, I felt it, a relief. My house is a house again. The families together, and we are praising and worshiping together. And yeah, there's no tenseness inside of us. And yeah, I have spoken to you like a mother. Yeah, sorry, there is something that I forgot. The boyfriend of her, we didn't even know him. We have asked her to bring the boyfriend. So we want to speak to him, or we just wanted to know him because she's already been pregnant. So he took a long time to come to us because I think he was very shy, or he thought that we are going to do something to him. And when we found out that he didn't have a father, and he asked my husband for forgiveness he even said he robbed her because of her having parents like us. And he asked a very beautiful thing. At last he said, will you teach me when the baby comes? Will you teach me how to be a father for my child? Because he was looking at Courtney, seeing Courtney's parents, and yeah, I think he have heard about us. So he asked us to help him to be a good father for his child. So yeah, from that day, he was welcome in our house. And yeah, he's still coming till today, and the baby is visiting him. and we show him some skills. So he's just enjoying his baby and being a father. Yeah, I'm speaking to you like a mother now, but I'm going to be speaking to you like a pastor and as a leader. What helped us was having that relationship, sharing all the time, connected to God, teaching our children the importance of having Father in your life. Thank you.
Good day. My name is Dr. Viola Fransman, and I work for Petra Institute for Children's Ministry. My passions are youth and children, and especially to see them reach their full potential. Now, one of the things that can really cause a child or a young person to not reach their full potential is teenage pregnancy, the issue that this series is giving attention to. So earlier on, my colleague, Annelien Neliswa Fortuin, that's who she is, Mimi, she says the people at work and the people in her community call her, shared her story. And I want to link onto her story and reflect on a few things that she pointed out. She said she's a pastor, but she's also a mom and a wife. She's now a grandmother. And let's look at the first part of her story. The first part of her story she shared the absolute sadness and grief and anger and how the family came to acceptance of the fact that her daughter was pregnant. Now, that process to me is similar to grieving, that when people die, we as leaders and pastors walk alongside people when they go through grieving. So as experts in how to walk alongside people who grieve, I think it would be apt for a pastor to walk alongside a family who is going through the issue of teenage pregnancy. Now, usually when teenage pregnancy happens in a community or in a church, what happens is that there's there's two reactions. The one is the pastor, because he or she feels that they should get involved, and then the people talk about them and saying that they are approving this act of these children, and they are approving the children being promiscuous, and that their importance or that their involvement would cause that child to have a second or a third baby even. The other way to react would be to completely ignore the situation as if it doesn't happen. Now, what sometimes happen in many churches that we have is that we have rules in place or measures in place to handle teenage pregnancy. And for the most part, they are to punish the mother by measures that we avoid them, in some cases, to come to church as part of the measurements, or force them to come and attend weekly church services on a Sunday morning and evening and Wednesday. And all these punishments usually land on the young lady who is becoming the mother. So the system the systems that we have in place in our respective churches, as you are aware of, they're not helping the situation. So I'm asking myself, what would Jesus, who we proclaim as the head of the church, do in a situation if he was in your shoes today and in your congregation you have a teenage mom or a teenage dad or a family who is going through this crisis? The first thing is the grieving I spoke about earlier. The second thing is that Jesus became fully man and fully God, so that we can go to him and explain and talk to him about what we are going through. As a pastor, it is important because you are faced with different and several decisions that you have to make daily, big ones and small ones, and this is definitely one of the bigger ones. So he would understand you. As a pastor, we should also be aware of what the family is going through, the loss of a daughter, the dreams that they had, the loss of the child that they raised. Adjusting to this very new situation is not easy. One of the things that Annalene highlighted was it bothered her so much she had to make right with her daughter because she didn't want to talk to her in ways that was so destructive and so negative that it could cause the baby who was growing inside her daughter to begin to experience rejection. And sometimes when you're in the situation, you need someone from outside to come and tell you that. And that's a contribution that you as a pastor can make. Another thing is the role of a pastor should be to bring hope, always hope. The family itself, when the situation happens in their house, they are embarrassed and angry and sad, and a lot of very negative emotions go through. They go through all of those negative emotions, and as a pastor, our involvement with the family can bring hope. Now, I know people will talk. People always talk. That's what they do. But we are first and foremost bearers of this calling that God has placed on each and every one of us. What a family also need in that situation where you as a pastor or a leader can come in is to listen, just plain old listen. We should be in the business of talking less and listening more. Nelly's final words were relationships, relationships, relationships. She said that if the relationship in their family had not been strong before this incident happened, they would not have made it. So we can be bearers of hope. We can help the family see that the new child coming into their home is a blessing from God, regardless of the package the baby comes. We can help them to remember that Jesus became fully man and fully God, to understand that which they are going through. And we can help them to grieve, and we can listen. And lastly, we can help them to restore their own relationship with God, the grandparents and the young lady and the young father, to restore that relationship with God so that the relationships amongst themselves can be restored, because the baby is not going to go away. He or she is going to come, and they're going to be there, and they're going to need an environment to grow up in that is a good and healthy environment for them to grow up in. I want to thank you for your time and for your commitment to attend this series or this webinar that Sikunye is hosting. It shows that you really care and that you really want to do something for the youth in your community who are going through this crisis, and that you want to be there for families. I wish you the wisdom that Solomon had to handle each and every situation in your congregation where you may encounter teenage pregnancy. And I wish you big ears so that you can listen to God and convey the heart of God regarding this baby and the pregnancy to the respective families in your congregation. Thank you.
Wow. Well, what I appreciate about hearing the story of Pastor Annalene Fontaine is how real it is. When we talk about statistics, it can feel like it's out there, but when we hear a pastor's story of her own daughter, it brings it so much closer to home. And I see in the chat box how many people have been touched by this story. I really am enjoying reading your comments and contributions. Thank you so much for participating in that way. If we were in person, I know we would have a big discussion around tables. But this section from Dr. Viola Fransman and Annelien Fortuyn helps me see that there's a journey to this, to process the very real emotions that the future granny and grandpa and the teenager are experiencing. It also demonstrates, and this came through in the chat box, it demonstrates that reconciliation can be possible. But if we shame, if we shun, if we reject, if we cast out, we're probably not going to see the teenage father asking questions of how he can be a good father to his new child. Dr. Viola helped us see that relationships are crucially important. And one of the powerful opportunities that the local church has in these kinds of situations is to bring the reconciliation within families who are facing these big realities. That someone like a church leader can come into the family, they're from the outside of the family, and they're respected, and they're able to come in and find ways of bringing healing to the relationships that have been interrupted by this pregnancy. And as the family processes this big news and big emotions, having someone journey with them is a powerful tool of healing, knowing that it's not simple, it's not easy, and it's not quick, but it is possible. Now, church leaders that are part of this webinar tonight, I want to say, we see you. We know that this is not simple. We know that this is not easy. And I hope that you hear the heart of Sikunye, that we're not on the outside criticizing you for doing something or criticizing you for not doing something. We want to be alongside you. And we hope that we can inspire you and give you ideas and information and ways that you can be caring for teen parents, even when it is complicated. Now let's turn our attention to another voice note from a teenager. We asked Colleen Candid to interview a teen mother. Colleen is a counselor and a center manager at the Zoe Project. The Zoe Project runs a variety of educational programs that's equipping mothers and families with the tools to make informed decisions for themselves and their children. So in this voice note, you're going to hear Colleen asking the questions and a teen mother responding. Let's listen in.
How did your family respond when you told them you were pregnant?
My family was like, I can just say disappointed, very disappointed.
Is there anything difficult about being pregnant as a teenager?
The only thing about its difficulty is that the fact that you're always being judged by people when they see you because you're young and you're walking with a stomach.
What hopes and dreams do you have for your child?
My hopes for my child is that he's not going to be raised the way I was raised, and my dreams for him is like just as any other mother would dream for the baby to become successful and like succeed in life.
Give an example of a time you felt supported in your pregnancy, birth, or parenting.
I'd say mostly in my birth and my parenting, because when I was pregnant, my family, like, they didn't want anything to do with me, but when I gave birth, they wanted everything to do with me because I brought a new life into the family. And regarding parenting, they're always teaching me like how to do things right and stuff regarding my baby.
How did your church leaders respond when they found out you were pregnant?
They were as if they were like ashamed as well as also disappointed, because like you go in church and you come from the Sunday school, but yet here you come teenage, like you were a teenager and you're pregnant and still attending the church. So I would say they were like ashamed and judgmental.
Since you fell pregnant, how different is your church experience?
My church experience is like different, because I'd say when I come in church I'd always feel awkward and weird, because I don't know what the church members is like thinking in their mind when they see me with my baby in church.
And what would you want from your church community in this time of your life?
To like just so that they're not can be so judgmental, because like sometimes the church members don't know your background or where you come from, like what made you have that baby, and like just be like supportive.
So good for us to be listening to the teenagers and bringing their voices into this webinar. And I'm going to ask that we slow things down a little bit now. And I want you to think of a teenager who is a parent that's in your church, in your community, or in your family, perhaps. As you think of that teenager, what do you want for them? What do you want for them now? What do you want for them into the future? What kind of parent do you want them to be? What do you want for their young child, their baby? How do you want the community around the teenager to treat them and their child? Let's just give that some thought with what we've heard tonight. These are perhaps interesting questions to ponder, because when I've had conversations with some church leaders and congregants, sometimes they say, or they have a view saying, you know what, these teenagers got themselves into it. It's their fault they're in this difficult situation. They need to be responsible and accountable for their sin. I don't know if you've heard people share something like that. And there's a lot that we can say in response to that kind of approach. But there's just one thought that I want to leave with you. There's a bigger conversation to address that, and I hope that you're grappling with that. But the one thing I want to share with you is that every pregnancy story is unique. It's possible that the teen girl did not have a choice, that she was raped. Maybe it was a much older man who provides financially for her and her family. It's hard to say that it's her fault, isn't it? But maybe in this teenage pregnancy story, there are two teenagers who are making their own choices to have sex outside of marriage, and you would say that they are sinning. But let's consider this. The baby is never a sin. The baby is a life knitted together by God, valued by Him, and worthy of love and dignity. I heard a pastor share with me that he had a big realization when thinking about this topic. He recognized that when he was punishing a teen mother by asking her to leave the church, what he was actually doing was punishing the baby too. And the baby had no choice in how he or she was conceived. And so, for the sake of this young life, for the sake of the teen mom, churches can care for and support them so that they can thrive. We want them to be healthy. I know that's what you want too. I know you want the baby to have a good, solid foundation laid in the first 1,000 days. I know you want that young child to have a brighter future. Now, the issues of teen pregnancy are big. We've gone through just a few tonight. And these issues affect the teenager, they affect the child, they affect the families, they affect churches, they affect communities. This is not a simple issue. And I trust that as we reach the end of our time together tonight, you're feeling fresh empathy for teen parents with a deeper understanding of the issues that they are facing, and that you're beginning to think about ways in which you can be part of a caring community for teenage parents. Now, I know that we didn't get very practical tonight. That's all covered in the next 2 weeks. And I do invite you to register and join us then. Be reminded that the session is a week from today. That's on the Wednesday, the 27th of November at 7 p.m. These are practical ways we're going to be sharing that you can support children who are having children. Please be reminded that you do need to register for this event. Even if you registered for tonight, you do need to register for next week as well. And we'll put the link in the chat box. If you want to know what is coming up next week, we'll be exploring. Victoria Sekakani will help us reflect on that question that we just reflected on. What do we want for teenagers and their children? Dr. Jeremy Weingard will help us answer the questions. Can you care for teen parents without promoting sin or promoting promiscuity? Dr. Estelle Lawrence will explore how to create layers of support around teen parents. Reverend Bernadette White Phillips will share how her church has supported teen parents. and Mr. Cleopas Maseko from Tembalethu in Nkomazi will look at how churches can engage inside the family structures. And inside the chat box is the link that you do need to follow to register for next week. And as a reminder, we will be sending out the recording of tonight's session, as well as attachments, including the two presentations, two slideshows that you might want to go through in more detail or on a bigger device. If you are new to Sikunye, I want to invite you to our Church and Early Life workshop. This is an interactive conversation around what local faith communities can be doing to strengthen families in general who have children in the first 1,000 days of life, so that those caregivers can provide what their young child needs. You can access the dates and the registration information on our events page. And again, we have put the links in the chat box for you to follow. In many ways, it's an introduction to who Sikunye is and the role of the local church. Also, if you are new to us, you are welcome to follow us on social media to continue the conversation with us online. Our handles are posted in the chat box that you can follow them and follow the conversation further. As we reach the end of tonight, I want to thank our panelists for their work in making tonight happen. Mrs. Henny, Dr. Masson, and Dr. Fransman, we really do appreciate the work that you're doing, your time, your expertise, and I want to thank every one of you, the attendees, for joining us tonight. We invite you to join us next week to be part of the whole conversation, and the following week as well, that you can get the big picture and grow in your care and support for teenagers who are parents. Thank you for your participation. I've thoroughly enjoyed being with you tonight and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much, and God bless.